My name is Rashid Hassan al-Mansuri, and I need to tell what happened. I feel this physical need to put it into words because what I experienced changed everything I thought I knew about God, about truth, and about myself. I am sitting now, thousands of miles from Damascus, the home I knew, and sometimes when I close my eyes, it all still feels like a fever dream, a hallucination, but it wasn't. It was the most painfully real thing that has ever happened to me. And for you to understand the night everything broke, the night the floor disappeared from under my feet, you first need to understand who I was. I was born in 1984, into a devout Sunni family. My childhood was marked by the sound of the adhan, the call to prayer, echoing across the rooftops 5 times a day. That sound was the rhythm of my life, the heartbeat of everything I knew. Faith wasn't something we practiced, it was the air we breathed. But it was my grandfather, my Jito, a retired imam with a gentle smile, who planted in me more than devotion. He planted in me a hunger. Sitting in his garden, surrounded by the smell of jasmine, he taught me that seeking to understand God was the highest human calling. And I believed him. That hunger my grandfather planted guided me. At 19, I left Damascus and went to Cairo, to Al-Azhar University, one of the most revered centers of Islamic learning in the world. My parents wept with pride. Those years in Cairo weren't just about study, they were about forging an identity. I became a scholar. I dove into theology, jurisprudence, history, and classical Arabic. But my interest went further. I wanted to understand other religions, not because I had doubts, but because I had none. My professors encouraged us. A true scholar must know the opponent's arguments better than he knows them himself. So, I studied. I learned Hebrew to read the Torah in its original language. I learned Koine Greek to be able to read the New Testament as it was written. I wasn't searching for truth. I was certain I already possessed it. I was sharpening my blades. I was preparing to be a defender of the faith, to protect the Ummah, the Muslim community, from teachings I saw as corrupted and false. When I returned to Damascus, I was a man on a mission. I married Ila, a wonderful, intelligent, and devout woman. We had 2 children, Omar and Amira. Their laughter filled our apartment, and my life was good. I became a respected scholar in the community. And my specialty, the thing I was known for, was comparative religion. More specifically, I specialized in dismantling the claims of Christianity. I was the man parents sought out when their children came back from university with uncomfortable questions. I was the one young men looked for after a debate with missionaries. I would sit with them, listen calmly, and then, methodically, I would deconstruct everything. The Trinity? A logical and mathematical impossibility. The divinity of Jesus? A concept invented decades after his death. A clear polytheistic corruption. The crucifixion? A stain on history, theologically incoherent. I knew every textual contradiction, every variant in the New Testament manuscripts, every debate in the early church councils, and I believed every word I said. In 2017, I received the proposal that seemed to be the culmination of my life's work. A prominent Islamic publisher in Beirut contacted me. They had read my articles, heard about my lectures. They wanted me to write a book, not just any book, but a comprehensive, definitive work that would systematically expose the errors, corruptions, and theological impossibilities of Christianity. It would be academic, but accessible. It would be the tool that imams would use in their teachings, that Muslim parents would give their children to vaccinate them against doubts. I felt a thrill. This was it. This was how I would serve Allah and protect my faith. I accepted immediately. I received a generous advance and an 18-month deadline. I told Illa I would need absolute focus. In June 2017, I locked myself in my office. I was surrounded by Bibles in 4 languages, commentaries from church fathers, textual criticism texts, and stacks of notebooks. My plan was methodical. I would dissect the New Testament, verse by verse, and build an undeniable case. I was in control. I was doing God's work. The first months were exactly as I expected. My work was focused, almost surgical. I would pray Fajr before dawn and go straight to my office. Ila made sure no one interrupted me. I felt like a detective building a case. I filled notebook after notebook with what I believed to be the irrefutable proof. Here, a clear contradiction between the resurrection accounts in the Gospels. There, a significant textual variant in an ancient manuscript that, to me, proved the text had been altered. I tracked the evolution of the Trinity doctrine, from a simple Jewish monotheism to the complex theological formula established at Nicaea. I was triumphant. Every discovery reinforced my confidence. I was exposing once and for all the unstable foundation upon which Christianity had been built. I was doing exactly what I set out to do, and I felt righteous, correct in my purpose. The truth was on my side. Then, something started to happen. A small thing, like a pebble in my shoe. It began with the issue of the manuscripts. I had always taught that the New Testament was textually corrupt, citing the thousands of variants number. It was a pillar of my argument. But now, to write the book, I wasn't just repeating what I learned. I was going deep into the primary academic sources on textual criticism, and the very scholars I read, even the secular ones, told a different story. Yes, there were thousands of variants, but the overwhelming majority of them were trivial. Spelling errors, the inversion of words, the use of a synonym. When it came to variants that actually changed the meaning of a passage, the number was minuscule. And, most disturbing of all, no central doctrine of Christianity depended on one of these textually dubious passages. The textual integrity was, in fact, shockingly robust compared to other ancient texts. This irritated me. It was an inconvenient fact that didn't fit my narrative. I noted it and set it aside, determined to minimize it. But the pebble was just the beginning. The real disturbance came from the very words I was trying to refute. I had read the Gospels before, of course, but as an opponent. Now I was reading them day after day, hour after hour, immersed in them to find flaws. And the words of Jesus began to affect me. The Sermon on the Mount was what got me first. I read it, expecting to find simplistic or impractical morality. Instead, I found something that cut me to the bone. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. There was an authority in these words, a radical purity I had never encountered anywhere else. These weren't the teachings of an ordinary prophet. There was something about them that seemed impossible, yet at the same time, profoundly true. I would find myself reading a passage and feeling a shiver. I would shut the book quickly, angry with myself. I wasn't there to be moved. I was there to refute. But the words wouldn't leave me alone. Then, there was one particular passage, one that began to haunt me. I read it, and unlike the others, this one didn't give me shivers. It caused me fear. It was from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6. I knew it, of course. It was the center of Christian arrogance, as I saw it. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I had always dismissed this as proof of textual corruption. But now, reading it in the original Greek, something hit me differently. He didn't say, "I show the way," or "I teach the truth." He said, "I am." He was equating himself with the very essence of reality, the very source of life. The absoluteness of this claim was breathtaking. It was a claim that only two people could make, a madman or God himself incarnate. I tried to dismiss it as obvious blasphemy, but it stuck in my mind. I am the truth. I started to think about it as I tried to sleep, as I played with my children. I am the truth. What kind of man says that? Then I made the mistake of reading Isaiah 53. I had studied the Hebrew prophets before, but always through the lens of Islamic interpretation, which teaches us that these books were corrupted by Jews and Christians. I read looking for flaws, for later insertions. But that afternoon, I read the text in Hebrew, straight from the source. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. By his wounds, we are healed. The text described a suffering servant, someone innocent who would die for the sins of others. The description was visceral, specific, almost surgical. Christian apologists said this was written 700 years before Christ. The Islamic interpretation tried to say it was about the prophet Isaiah himself or about the nation of Israel. But as I read those ancient words, the Hebrew grammar wouldn't let me lie. It was an individual, an innocent man, someone who would die and yet somehow would see his offspring and prolong his days. It sounded exactly like Jesus. I tried. I fought. I looked for any alternative explanation in my Jewish and Islamic commentaries. Nothing worked. The passage resisted any attempt to be twisted. For the first time, I felt a cold fear in my stomach. What if it wasn't a corruption? What if it was a prophecy? I didn't tell anyone. How could I? I was Rashid al-Mansuri, the man writing the definitive book against Christianity. I couldn't admit to Illa or to my colleagues at the mosque that the foundations of my certainty were cracking. So, I did what any proud man would do. I worked harder. I isolated myself. I told Illa I needed total focus to meet the deadline, that I couldn't be disturbed. The truth is, I didn't want her to see my face. I was afraid she could read in my eyes the confusion that was consuming me. I lied to my editors, saying the book was progressing wonderfully, when in fact I had stopped writing for weeks. I was no longer producing. I was just reading, desperately, trying to find my way back to the certainty I had lost. I was living a double life inside my own home. 6 months into the research, the dreams began. They were vivid, intense dreams that left me exhausted upon waking. I dreamed of an overwhelming light, beautiful and terrible. I dreamed of someone calling my name, though I could never see the face of the one calling. One night I dreamed I was drowning. I felt the dark water filling my lungs, the panic of imminent death, sinking deeper and deeper. Then a hand broke the surface, grabbed my arm, and pulled me into the air with an undeniable force. I woke up in my bed in Damascus, gasping, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to interpret these as spiritual attacks, the shaitan trying to distract me from my sacred work. But deep down, they didn't feel like attacks. They felt like invitations. They felt like the hand of someone who was trying to save me, and that terrified me more than the drowning. We reached January 2018, and I was in total crisis. Externally, I maintained the facade. I prayed at the mosque. I had dinner with my family. I answered students' questions. But inside, I was unraveling. I started reading testimonies of ex-Muslims, something I had always despised. Before, I saw them as traitors or ignorant. Now I read their words and saw my own reflection. A Moroccan imam described how the Sermon on the Mount had disarmed him. I realized I wasn't reading the words of a prophet pointing to God, he wrote, but of God himself showing us who he is. I slammed my laptop shut, as if those words could physically infect me. But it was too late. I knew I had to face the central problem. I had to face the Gospel of John again. It was the most theological gospel, the most direct about Jesus' divinity. It was the one that offended me the most. I decided I would read it one last time, from beginning to end, in a single sitting. I would find the flaws. I would kill this doubt. I had no idea that that night the man who opened that Bible was about to die. It was April 17th, 2018. I remember the date like a man remembers the day his house was struck by lightning. My life today is divided, before that night and after. It was past midnight. Illa and the children had been asleep for hours. The Damascus apartment was perfectly silent. The only sound was the low hum of my computer, and occasionally a car passing on the street below. I was exhausted, not just physically tired, but depleted on a spiritual level, as if my soul was being stretched on a rack. I was tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of doubting. I was sitting there staring at my Arabic Bible open on the desk, the Gospel of John. I was in chapter 10. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I read those words, and something inside me broke. All my academic pride, my certainty, my identity, it all fell apart. I closed my eyes. It wasn't a formal prayer. It was a whisper of pure defeat. Jesus, I said in a low voice in the solitude of my office, if you are real, if you are who you say you are, I need to know. I can't take this anymore. Show me the truth, no matter the cost. I expected silence, the same silence I had been facing for months. Instead, I heard my name, Rashid. It wasn't a voice in my head. It wasn't a thought or an impression. It was an audible voice, as real and clear as if someone was standing right next to me in the room. My heart stopped and then hammered, pounding in my chest. My eyes flew open. I looked wildly around the office. The door was closed. The window was closed. No one was there. I was alone. My first thought was that I had broken, that the stress, the lack of sleep, the months of internal conflict, it had all culminated, and I was having an auditory hallucination. It was the only logical explanation. I was going insane. I tried to control my breathing, putting my hand on my chest, feeling the panic rise in my throat. I must have imagined it. It was the stress. I tried to calm down. I took a deep breath. I was shaking. I looked back at the Bible on the desk, trying to focus on the words, trying to anchor myself in physical reality. And then, I heard it again. Rashid. This time, there was no mistaking it. It wasn't imagination. The voice filled the room. It wasn't loud, but it had a weight, an authority that seemed to vibrate in the air, vibrate in my bones. It was a voice that seemed to know me in a way no one had ever known me, a voice of absolute tenderness and power. I shot up from my chair so fast it toppled backward, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I was shaking violently now from head to toe, and the voice spoke again, not just my name, but more. Rashid, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have called you by your name. You are mine. The words weren't for my ears. They were for my spirit. They bypassed all my intellectual defenses, all my training, and struck the center of who I was. I was paralyzed, gripping the edge of my desk to keep from falling. I couldn't breathe. The fear was so intense it was physical. It felt like I was being crushed. And then, as I stared, unable to process what was happening, something impossible occurred. The Bible on my desk, which I had left open, but which was now slightly closed from my sudden movement, began to move. The pages began to turn by themselves, one by one, then faster, as if a strong wind were blowing through my closed office. I couldn't look away. The sound of the turning pages was the only sound in the room, apart from my own ragged breathing. The pages kept turning, flipping through the Old Testament, and then they stopped. They just stopped. I stared, my brain screaming that this couldn't be real. With my legs shaking so badly they could barely hold me, I moved closer to the desk and looked down at where the book had stopped. It was Isaiah, chapter 43, and my eyes fell immediately on the first verse. But now this is what the Lord says, He who created you, Jacob, He who formed you, Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. I collapsed. My legs simply gave out. I fell to the floor next to my desk, my knees hitting the floor hard, but I felt no pain. My entire being was focused on the impossible reality that had just happened. The exact words the voice spoke were printed in the ancient text. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a hallucination. It was God. The God I had studied. The God I had debated. The God I thought I knew and served. He was there, in my office, in Damascus, and he had spoken to me, and he had called me mine. The terror I felt before was suddenly replaced by something even more overwhelming, an awe that was so absolute it stopped my heart. I was in the presence of the Holy One. I, Rashid al-Mansuri, a man full of pride and arguments, was on the floor before the creator of the universe. And then, the love came. It was the most intense sensation I have ever experienced. It wasn't a concept. It wasn't a warm emotion. It was a force. It entered the office like a liquid golden light, filling every corner, passing through my clothes, through my skin, and filling every empty part of me. And in that love, I felt seen, completely seen. I felt as if he saw every moment of my life. He saw my academic pride. He saw every time I had mocked the cross. He saw every student I had arrogantly saved from the Christian faith. He saw my anger, my envy, my doubt, every secret sin I barely admitted to myself. I was naked before him, with all my filth exposed. And his response to all of it was not judgment. It was this unbearable love, a love so pure and so unmerited that it broke me. I began to sob. Not cry, but sob from the depths of my stomach. I was face down on my office rug, tears and mucus soaking the fibers, and I didn't care. I was shattered into a million pieces. Years of certainty, decades of religious identity, all of it dissolved like paper in the rain. I was a proud man who had just discovered that everything he based his life on was wrong, and the God I had rejected was right there, in front of me, loving me anyway. "But I'm a Muslim!" I finally cried out, my voice muffled by the floor. "I rejected you! I spoke against you! I was writing a book to prove you are false! How can you want me? How?" I was screaming at God, confessing my crimes against him in the same breath. The voice did not speak audibly again, but the answer came, clear as day, not in my ears, but in my heart, in my mind, in every cell of my body. "Rashid, I chose you before the foundation of the world. Your arguments against me were never louder than my call for you. I have been chasing you your whole life. waiting for this moment. Nothing you have done has made me love you less. Nothing you could do would make me love you more. Stop fighting. And with those words, I stopped. All the struggle, all the tension, all the fear I had carried for months, it all drained away. I just surrendered. The old Rashid, the scholar, the defender of the faith, the right man, died right there, on his office floor. And in his place, something new was born, crying and trembling, soaked in a forgiveness I didn't understand, but which I knew was the only real thing in the universe. I don't know how long I lay there on the floor. It could have been minutes or an hour. Time lost its meaning. The initial terror had passed, and what remained was a deep exhaustion and peace. It was a peace I could not understand. My face was stained with tears. My body was shaking. And yet, for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of God. I had spent my entire existence trying to serve Him, fearing Him, trying to earn Him through rituals, prayers, and knowledge. My view of salvation was a scale, where I hoped my good deeds would outweigh the bad on the day of judgment. And there, on my office floor, I understood the crushing truth. The scale didn't matter. I couldn't earn this. I couldn't win what I was feeling. This love, this forgiveness, was a gift. And it wasn't a gift because I was good. It was a gift because He was good. I understood, on a level my academic brain could never have reached, what Christians called grace. Gradually, I began to feel my body again. My knees ached from the fall. My face was stiff from the dried tears. The silence in the office was thick, but the overwhelming presence had receded. Not that He had left, but the intensity had lessened, like the heat of a fire dying down to warm embers. He let me breathe. It was then that I noticed the light. A thin line of gray-blue was appearing at the edge of my window curtain. It was dawn. I had been up all night, fighting, and then surrendering. The night was over. A new day was beginning. A day I would face as a completely different man, stripped of everything I had ever known. The physical exhaustion was immense, but my mind was clearer, more awake than it had ever been. I pulled myself up, using my desk for support. My limbs felt heavy, as if I had run a marathon. I looked around my office. Everything was the same, but nothing was the same. My books, the hundreds of books on Islamic theology, jurisprudence, the Hebrew and Greek texts, they looked like objects from a museum. They were the tools of a man who no longer existed. My gaze fell on the pile of notes and the printed chapters of my book, the book that was going to dismantle Christianity. I felt a wave of shame and sorrow so deep, it nearly buckled my knees again. I wasn't just wrong. I had been fighting the very thing that was calling me, chasing me, loving me. The Bible was still there, open to Isaiah 43. I have called you by your name. You are mine. I reached out and touched the paper, half expecting it to disappear. But it was real. And then, the sound began. The sound that had been the soundtrack of my entire life. From the nearby mosque, the muezzin's voice began to chant the adhan for the Fajr prayer. Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest. For 34 years, that sound had been my call to bow. It was my duty, my identity. But that morning, the sound hit me like a physical blow. It paralyzed me. I couldn't go. I couldn't recite the words. I couldn't bow to a God who now seemed like a distant shadow compared to the living Jesus I had just met. And as the call echoed over sleepy Damascus, I heard another sound, much closer. The sound of my bedroom door opening. Isla. She was waking up to pray. She would be expecting me to join her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. The God I had found had given me everything. And I knew, in that paralyzed second, that He would cost me everything. I stood there, paralyzed, listening to Ila's footsteps in the hallway. The adhan was still echoing outside. She stopped at the door of my office, which I had left ajar. She was dressed for prayer, wearing her prayer hijab. Her face, sleepy and soft, changed instantly. She wasn't looking at a scholar. She was looking at a ghost. My eyes must have been red and swollen. My face streaked with dried tears. "Rashid?" she whispered, and her voice was filled with a sudden fear. "What happened? Are you all right? You missed the prayer." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? I just met Jesus in the office? She would think I'd gone mad. I can't pray anymore. She would call her family. So I did the first thing that came to mind. I lied. It was the first lie of my new life, and it burned my throat. I worked all night, I stammered, rubbing my face, trying to seem merely tired. I think I'm sick. I can't. I'm just going to lie down. The look on her face was one of pure confusion and worry. She reached out to touch my forehead, but I flinched away instinctively. I couldn't bear her gentle touch, not when I was carrying this bomb. I walked past her, out of the office, and went to the guest room, not our room. I closed the door and heard through the wood the sound of her unrolling her prayer mat alone. The next 3 days were a form of torture I didn't know existed. I moved through my own home like a ghost. I was physically present, but my soul was somewhere else, still on its knees on the office floor. I told Illa it was severe exhaustion from work, that I needed silence. She tried to take care of me, bringing me tea, trying to get me to eat, but her eyes were filled with fear. The worst part was when the children, Omar and Amira, came running to me. "Baba, let's play," Omar would say, and I would have to make a physical effort to smile. I would hug them, smelling their hair, and my heart would break into a million pieces. I couldn't lie to God anymore, but now I was lying to everyone I loved. The worst part, the absolute torture, were the prayer times. 5 times a day the house would go quiet. Ila would go to pray. And I couldn't. I would lock myself in the office. I couldn't say the words. I couldn't recite the Shahada. How could I say, "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger," when I had heard the voice of the Son of God himself? The lie of omission was a physical weight, crushing my chest. I was being suffocated by the secret. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And when I did, I'd wake up in a panic, thinking it had all been a dream, only to see the open Bible on my desk and know it was real. I realized the experience in the office wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. I was in an impossible limbo. I couldn't go back to who I was, and I couldn't be who I was becoming. Living in silence was unsustainable. The presence of Jesus wasn't something I could put in a compartment. It was a reality that redefined everything else. I was terrified, not for my safety yet, but for Illa. I would look at her, my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, and I knew the truth would devastate her. I knew that the second I spoke, I would be lighting the match that would burn my house down. I spent hours in the office, not reading, just staring at the empty chair where he had spoken to me, begging for a way out that didn't exist. On the night of the 3rd day, I couldn't take it anymore. Isla was sitting in the living room pretending to read a book, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The children were asleep. The house was silent, but it was a sick silence, full of unsaid words. She looked up as I walked in, her face a mask of worry. "Rashid, this has gone on long enough," she said, her voice trembling. "You are scaring us. Tomorrow, I am calling the imam. You need help." The word imam hit me like an electric shock. She was going to bring the outside world, the world of my old identity, into this. I knew in that moment I was out of time. I had to speak. I had to control the narrative, even if it was a narrative of disaster. I sat in the chair opposite her. My hands were sweating so much I wiped them on my pants. "Ila," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to my ears. "Don't call the imam. What's wrong with me? It's not something he can fix. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen. Please just listen." I took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out, tripping over each other. I didn't know where to start, so I started with the book. The book I'm writing," I said, my voice low. I started the research, and I found things I couldn't explain, things that challenged everything I believed. I told her about Isaiah 53. I told her about the Gospel of John. She listened, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. And then I told her about the night 3 days ago. I told her everything, the desperate prayer, the audible voice calling my name, the Bible opening by itself to the very same passage. I described the love I felt, the presence that filled me. I told her it wasn't a dream, that it wasn't stress. And then I said the words that sealed my fate. "Ila, I found him, the God I was looking for. And it's not who we thought. I believe, Ila, I believe that Jesus, Isa, is who he said he was. He is the Son of God. He is the way." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Ila didn't move for a long moment. She just stared at me, her large, dark eyes, and I couldn't read her expression. It was like she hadn't heard me, or I had spoken in a language she didn't understand. Then she blinked. Once, twice, and she let out a short, nervous laugh. A breakdown, she whispered. That's it. You've had a nervous breakdown, Rashid. You worked too hard. You didn't sleep. Your brain, it played a trick on you. She stood up and came toward me, her voice now full of a frantic urgency. It's okay, Habibi, she said, trying to take my hands, but I kept them clenched. We'll get help. You'll take time off. We'll travel. We'll see a doctor. You're exhausted, that's it. You're exhausted and you had a very vivid nightmare. You didn't mean it. You can't have meant it. Ila, it wasn't a breakdown, I said, and my voice was steady, steadier than I expected. The certainty of what I experienced was the only solid thing under my feet. It was real, more real than this room. The instant I said that, her mask of concern shattered. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something I had never seen in her before. Pure terror, which quickly turned to rage. She recoiled from me as if I had just struck her. Are you insane? She hissed, her voice low and full of venom. Are you insane? Or are you evil? Do you have any idea what you are saying? Apostasy. You know what that word means, Rashid? You, of all people, know what it means. You're not talking about a theological difference. You are talking about destroying our lives. Our children. What am I going to tell my father? What am I going to tell Omar and Amira when they ask why their father is a kafir? The word kafir, infidel, coming from her, hit me like a slap. I'm not destroying anything, I tried to say, but my voice broke. I found the truth. The truth? She screamed, forgetting to keep her voice down, and I flinched, expecting the children to wake up. Your truth will get us killed. Your truth will take your children from you. You're a scholar. You know what they do to us. You know what your own family will do to you. She was crying now, tears of rage and dread streaming down her face. She pointed a trembling finger at me. I don't know what happened to you in that office, but you are going to fix this. You are going to the imam tomorrow. You are going to confess your confused thoughts. You will pray. You will repent. You will go back to being the man I married. Because, Rashid, she said, her voice breaking on a sob, I will not live with this. I will not raise my children with an apostate. Fix this, or we are leaving. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room couch, in the same position, for hours. I could hear her crying in our bedroom, on the other side of the locked door. Every sob was like a nail through my chest. I was the cause of that pain. I had done that to the woman I loved. Satan's voice, or maybe just my own voice of panic, whispered in my ear, You can fix this. Just say she's right. Say it was a breakdown. Say you repent. You can have both. You can believe in Jesus secretly and keep your family. It was so tempting. It was an easy way out, a lie that would fix everything. But I knew it was a lie. How could I lie to her now? And how could I deny the God who had torn reality apart to find me? I remembered the words I'd read. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. I always thought that was a harsh metaphor. That night, I understood it was a literal description. It was a real choice, and I felt my heart being torn in two. When the sun rose, the crying in the bedroom had stopped. I heard movement. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. I heard the zipper of a suitcase. My blood ran cold. She wasn't bluffing. I stood up from the couch, my body aching. When she came out of the bedroom, she didn't look at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but her face was hard, resolved. She was holding her purse. I'm taking Omar and Amira to my parents' house, she said coldly, her voice hoarse from crying. They need to be away from this. Away from you. Ila, please, I begged, taking a step toward her. Don't do this. They're my children. She finally looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was something I never thought I would see. They were your children, she said. Their father died 3 nights ago in that office. I don't know who you are. She went to the children's room, and I heard her gently waking them. Come on, Habibis. We're going to visit Jito. I stood paralyzed in the living room, listening to the sleepy voices of my children. Omar asking why they had to go so early. Amira asking for me. Is Baba coming? She asked. I heard Ila hesitate. Baba is very busy with work. He'll meet us there. Another lie, but this time a lie to protect the children from me. I couldn't move. I wanted to run to them, grab them, lock the door, stop them from leaving. But how could I? I had become the poison in the house. I had become the danger. I watched them leave. Omar, 7 years old, rubbing his eyes, holding Ila's hand. Amira, 5, on her other arm, her sleepy head on her mother's shoulder. She looked back at me over Ila's shoulder. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't obey. I raised my hand in a trembling goodbye. Ila didn't look back. The front door opened, and then it closed. The click of the lock echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. The second the door closed, my legs gave out. I fell to my knees in the hallway. The silence was absolute. Their smell was still in the air. Omar's little shoes were by the door. Amira's toy was on the living room floor. And they were gone. The cost I had feared in theory had become a physical, brutal reality. I hadn't just lost my family. I had lost the sound of Omar's laugh. I had lost the weight of Amira's hand in mine. I cried. I howled. I beat my fists on the floor, screaming for my children, screaming at Jesus. Why? Why them? It was supposed to cost me everything, not them. I lay there, broken. And I knew Isla wasn't playing. She was a devout woman. In her mind, I hadn't just changed my mind. I had damned my soul and endangered the souls of her children. I was an apostate. I was contagious. That apartment, which had been my home, was now just an empty box. I don't know how long I was there. Hours, maybe. The sun was high outside, illuminating the dust on the furniture of a home that no longer felt like mine. The initial shock had turned into a dull ache, a hollow cavity in my chest where my children used to be. I was so immersed in this grief that I barely registered the knocking at the door. It wasn't a light knock. It was pounding, violent, demanding, making the door rattle. Before I could even get off the hallway floor, I heard a key in the lock. Ila must have called them. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. My father entered first. Behind him, my 2 older brothers, Ahmed and Karim. Their faces were not of concern. They were of fury. My father, the man who taught me to read the Quran, the son of the Imam, looked down at me on the floor with a disgust I never thought possible. He didn't even ask if I was okay. He just hissed, "Get up. Get up and tell us that what Ila said is the lie of a panicked woman." I got to my feet, using the wall for support. My legs were still shaking. I looked at the 3 men who were my blood, my tribe, my protection, and I saw nothing but accusation. "Where is she?" Ahmed asked, his eyes scanning the empty apartment. "She took the children," I said, my voice sounding dead. "She went to her parents' house." My father closed his eyes as if in physical pain. "So it's true," he whispered. "You did this. You threw away your life, your name, your children. For what?" Karim, my more practical brother, stepped forward. "Rashid, are you sick? Did someone give you something? Did one of those missionaries poison your mind? Tell us who it was. Tell us, and we'll take care of it. We can fix this. We can tell everyone you had a breakdown, but you have to recant. Now." They were offering me a way out. The same way out Ila offered. The lie of insanity. I looked at my father's face, a face I had spent my whole life trying to honor, and I tried uselessly to explain the unexplainable. "It wasn't poison," I said quietly. "I was in the office. I heard him. I felt him." "Heard who?" my father demanded, his voice rising. I couldn't say the name. I knew what the name would do. "I found God," I said, in a way that changed everything. My father laughed, a dry, terrible sound. "You found God? We gave you God. Islam is God. What you found was the shaitan." I shook my head. The tears came back, but this time they were tears of frustration. "No," I said, and my voice finally found strength. "I found Jesus, Isa, and he is Lord. He is the Son of God." The words hung in the air for a second. And then my father exploded. He lunged forward and hit me. It wasn't a slap. It was a closed fist punch to my face that sent me reeling back against the wall. The taste of blood filled my mouth. "Blasphemy!" he roared, his face red. "In my own family. You will repent for this." My brothers held me, one on each side, pinning me to the wall. My father was in my face, his chest heaving, tears of rage in his eyes. "Say it again," he threatened. "Say it again, and I'll kill you myself." I looked at him, my father, the man who loved me, and I saw a stranger. The man who taught me about Allah's mercy was ready to kill me for finding the source of that mercy. and I knew it was over. I said nothing. I just looked at him, blood dripping from my lip. My silence was my answer. He saw it. He understood. He recoiled, as if the very sight of me burned him. He straightened his clothes, wiped his eyes angrily, and his face became a mask of cold stone. "You are no longer my son," he said, each word landing like a stone. "I have no son. The Rashid I raised is dead. If I see you on the street, I don't know you. If you try to contact your mother, she will curse you." He turned to my brothers. "He is dead to us." They let me go, shoving me aside, and the three of them walked out. The door slammed, the final sound like a coffin being sealed shut. I slid down the wall to the floor. The apartment was silent again. In less than 24 hours, the experience in that office had cost me my wife, my children, and my family. I was alone, completely alone. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to survive the next day. I only knew that what happened in my office was real, and for some terrifying and mysterious reason, I could not, to this day, bring myself to regret it.
That was Rashid's story. What would you do if an encounter gave you the truth, but cost you absolutely everything? Let me know what you think in the comments. If this testimony impacted you, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. Don't go. The next recommended video appearing on your screen is powerful. Click and watch it now. See you there.